Hi everyone, today we're going to be making this Valentine's Day card. Continue watching to find out how. So first of all, what you're going to need to do is take some stamping card. And what we've got here is we've got some heart stamps, and I'm going to just show you a technique of how to put texture into your stamping. So I'm just going to pop it on this block here. I find it easier when I'm doing like a large background to have a few different stamps on one block, because it means that you can cover a lot more ground with just one stamp. So I'm just going to take some ink, and what you're going to do to create that texture is you're going to actually swipe over the card, over the stamps that are going to go on the card. So just swipe over. You can add it a couple of times just to create that texture. But what it means, instead of stamping flat so you get that solid image, you're actually going to get stripes on your card. So let me just show you. I'll just pop it here. And we're going to start creating. So you can see here that you're getting that texture, which just gives a little bit of a different layer to your stamping. So I'll just do it again so we can start creating a background. And then what happens is, even if you haven't stamped it perfectly, it's okay, because what we're going to be doing was actually going to be putting the die over the top. So what I would say, if that happens to you, just avoid that part when you put the die on. It's when you're cutting it out. There we go. I'm going to just keep one more time, just to get a larger layer of that stamping. So I'm just going to see if we've got enough room with our 3 dies that we're going to be using to cover that. Yep, I'm happy with that size. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to wipe off the stamp, because we want to just take that colour off just with a wet wipe, or a piece of tissue and some water should be fine. It comes off quite easily. And there we go. And what we're going to do is we're going to move on to another colour. Now what I've gone here is a lighter colour than the red, because what we want to do is almost have it like a shadow behind. Now what you could do, if you don't have a lighter colour, you could actually stamp once and then stamp again with the same stamp, and what that would do is it's sort of secondary stamping, so you create a slightly lighter look. We're just going to go over the top again with our swiping motion, and we're just going to pop it in. So we create sort of a shadow behind, and it doesn't have to be too precious. If some of the hearts go over the top of each other, that's okay too, just to kind of create that different texture. Okay, one more time, just again, swiping over. Whoop, trying to get away from me, swiping over. Don't stamp it like that. We don't want a solid colour. We want that pattern to be on the stamps. So you can see here the lines and textures that we're getting from doing that swiping really kind of gives a nice interest to the background. I think one more time that'll do. Just pop those away. There we go, just make sure that's down. When I'm using a block, I like to give it a little bit of a wiggle before I'm finished, just to make sure that I'm getting all of those edges of the stamps. And there we are, I'm happy with how that looks. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our dies in, and we're actually just going to cut these. Now, what I would recommend, when you want specific places, I'd recommend just putting a little bit of low-tack tape on that die to keep it in place. If we were covering the whole thing, it wouldn't really matter, but because we're being more specific about what parts that we've inked up we want to die cut, I'm just going to pop that there to hold it in place. Go, and then finally just the little one. Again, thinking about what part of that is going to be covered, so I'm sort of going half over 2 different hearts to create a different interest there. And then we're just going to send that through the die cutting machine. If you've never used a die cutting machine before, what you might hear, just there it was, the click of the metal. And that's just because those rollers in that die cutting machine are sending the pressure through the dies, and it's creating a little bit of a click of the metal hitting the plastic underneath, but that's completely normal. Just take that off. So we'll just take our low-tack tape off. If you do use low-tack tape, you can absolutely use it a few more times. So I always like to maybe just stick it somewhere that I can reuse. It's always good to get the most out of our products when you are crafting. And then there we go, we've got those. I'm going to move the bits to the side because we're done with that now. And what we've got is our 3 hearts with the textured pattern behind. Now this would work on a larger scale if you wanted to do a massive background or whatever, but I just like the idea of having just that little extra added texture. Now what I'm going to do is I've got another ink colour, and I'm just going to take some on a blending brush, and I'm just going to add a little bit of the blending around the outside to take away some of that white edge. Now what I would recommend when you're doing blending, don't go straight onto what you're blending with. Come from the side and just add a little bit like that, because obviously if you take it from straight onto there, you're going to add a little bit too much ink, and we really just want almost a halo of pink just to take away a little bit of harshness of that white edge. And you can keep doing it till you get the desired effect. The more times you go on, the more times you add ink, the more ink that's going to be on your heart. So I'm quite happy that once I've done all the way around the edge, I get almost a little bit of halo around there and a little bit of white in the middle, but it's taken away that harsh white edge from the edge of the die cut. And again, I can use up the ink that I've got on my glass mat, because that will stay wet on a glass mat, so I don't have to go straight back to my ink pad, and I'm not wasting any of my ink. Add a little bit more, but again, I'm just going to come from the glass mat onto the die cut. There we go. And then finally, we've got our little one here. Again, I'm going to use some of that ink that was on the glass mat and just add it on. This is obviously a bit smaller, so slightly harder to do, but you could always put a little, you could use, say, a pair of tweezers to hold that down, or a little bit of low tack tape to hold it in place if you don't want to get too messy, but it's not too bad. And there we go. So we've got some nice blending on the outside of our heart. I'm just going to get rid of that excess ink because we don't want that to go onto our project. And then I'm just going to pop these to the side. And what we've got here is I've also cut out of some red card and some white card, the same of the 2 smaller hearts. And what I'm going to do is I've got a white pen and a red pen, and I just want to add some faux stitching to round the heart. Now when it comes to faux stitching, don't worry too much about, I mean, we're going curved here, so it's not quite the same thing because we're not really going around a straight line. I'm just going around the line of the die cut. But if you were doing this on a straight line, don't worry too much about keeping it completely straight. I know that some people like to use rulers and things, but I think just going around with your hand and doing it freehand is better because it doesn't have to be completely straight or perfect because it's a faux stitch line. And then we're just going to do that the same on the little one, all the way round with our pen. Any pen will do. I mean, I've got a fine liner pen here because it makes it just a little bit easier having a thinner nib, but any pen will be fine. And then we're just going to move on to our white to go around the edge of the red. Again, the same thing. I'm just following the curve of the die cut, not worrying too much about all the stitching and everything being exactly the same size. I think just having it sort of slightly different each time, again, adds to the look. And then we got this all the way around with a white pen. And there we go. Right, so I'm just going to pop those to one side while we work on the topper of our card. Now this is cotton style paper, and I would recommend this for doing the technique that I'm about to show you. It just makes it a little bit easier. You can do it with card, but if you're going to do this technique, it's better with paper because it makes it easier to curl it. So I'm just going to sort of find a most central part, which is about there, and I'm going to snip up, not too far in, just snip into the center. Doesn't matter that it's not exactly the same, that's fine. And then I'm going to just get my pokey tool here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to curl round the edges. Just keep curling and holding it tight whilst you do it, just to make that edge curl stay. paper is pretty sort of malleable, so it pretty much will stay where you've put it. But I like to just hold it just for a few minutes to know that it's going to stay. And you can continue curling it throughout making the project. Do it every so often, or just hold it a little bit longer to make sure that it curls, or when you've put the topper on, curl it again, etc., etc. Keep curling it until it stays exactly where you want. Or finally, if you're not completely happy, you could always add a tiny little bit of glue just there to hold it in place. But I like it to be pretty sort of free, not held exactly where I put it. And so I'm happy there with that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of red here, which is a matte layer, so it's 1/4 of an inch slightly bigger than this one. And you'll see here that we've got created this little sort of window. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put our sentiment there. But what I want to make sure is I keep the sentiment within the space. So I'm just going to add a little dot here. It won't be seen, it's fine. And actually I'll show you a way. We've got that dot here, but I'm going to add a little bit something in a bit to get rid of that dot from view. And then what I've got here is a precision stamper, and we're going to put our little sentiment on. Now this sentiment that I've got here actually started out as one long sentiment saying happy Valentine's Day, but I wanted it to be one on top of the other rather than in a straight line. So I actually cut it. Now don't be worried about cutting rubber stamps, that's fine, because you can always line it back up again if you want it straight, but it just means that you get a bit more out of your one stamp, because you can do sort of one on top of the other layers, etc. by cutting it. Just make sure that you don't cut into the word, just cut it each word individually, making sure to do it in the space. And then we're just going to, oh, I got that upside down, sorry about that. Happy would have been upside down. And then we're just going to line it up. Like so. I'm not worrying too much about it being straight. I kind of like it slightly off kilter, and the wording itself makes it kind of nice, not dead straight. But if you wanted to, it's always good having that grid on that precision press as well if you did want it to be completely dead straight. Now I'm happy with that, so I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to use some white ink here. You may need to do this a couple of times. White ink is sort of slightly harder to put on than black ink. The pigment is slightly harder, so you may need to stamp that up twice, so don't worry, but that's why I'm using a precision press, in case I need to stamp it twice to get the words to be completely clear. Yeah, I'm just going to do it one more time, get that Valentine's Day to be slightly more darker. But I have the ability, because I've done it on the precision stamper. Just press that down. Okay, and then I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to take away our stamp here. And there we go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to pop our cotton paper onto here, and as I said, I'm going to show you a way of adding a little bit more detail to that, but not having to cover the whole thing, and also then getting rid of that white dot, making it look part of the card rather than the marking. So we're just going to pop this on. Again, you don't need too much glue, but just make sure you don't get it on the part where you've curled up, because you don't want glue splurging out the sides. And I'm using wet glue because it just gives me that little bit of wiggle room so I can line this up perfectly. Right, and then what I'm going to do, I've still got a bit of ink left on my brush. I'm just going to add a little bit on, actually I think I'll add a little bit more of the ink on here. I just want to give a little bit of colour to that white, sort of white paper. Just to sort of create a little bit more of a depth and dimension to my card. There we go. I'm just going to take that up and use that as well, so we don't waste any of our ink. Now I'm doing this straight onto the red because I knew that it wouldn't affect it, but if you were going putting this layer onto a lighter colour, I would do the blending first. but I knew it wouldn't have an effect on our red, so that was fine. I wanted to get it into place. There we go. And again, I'm just going to make sure that's all gone. Okay, and then I'm going to take my white pen, and what I'm going to do is, and this is a nice way, if you want to create a sort of faux background, very simply, just taking a white pen and adding a little bit of detail, a couple of dots here and there, to create a nice look on the card. And as I say, it then also gets rid of that white mark that I made where I needed to know where the sentiment was. And because we've stuck this down already, it also means we don't have to sit and cover loads of it. We only have to cover the bit that we know is going to be shown. And this is just a really easy way of creating almost a little ditzy print on some plain card. There we go. Oh, I'll do a little bit there as well. There we go. Happy with that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add our stamped hearts on with some, actually what I might do is cut this down a little bit, which is another way, because I know we're not going to need all of these, another way to use foam pads. Cut them in half because we're not going to need it all. We're going to pop that on and work our way down. Now, because obviously we're putting foam pads on all of these, what I would do is work out where you need the foam pads, so there's not to put here, otherwise it's going to be much bigger one side. So I'm going to put one foam pad here because that's going to touch this part, and I'm going to just put glue here so it can use the top part of that heart instead of putting foam tape on both sides. So a little bit of glue that side and a foam pad to bring one side up to match the other side, like that. It just means that it's still the same height as the one above. And again, the same here, I'm just going to line it up, put a little bit of glue on this side and a foam pad on that side. Keep doing it all the way down, foam pad on one side, glue on the other. This foam pad doesn't want to come off. There we go. And then finally, with these smaller ones, see the tiniest bit of foam pad. Don't need a lot. You can also get slightly smaller foam pads, but I haven't got any of those, but you can get slightly smaller ones if you don't want to have to cut them down. Okay. And then finally, one last one. Just to finish it off. Right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of the waste black here, slice that down. I'm going to put it on the bottom just to create a bit of a border. Keep all your waste, it's always good, because I think that having just a little line here just creates a little sort of interest and breaks up that red and white a little bit. Just going to pop it on. I haven't worried about the length. I'm just going to pop that down on top here and snip it off from the back. Just hold that down for a minute. I'm using wet glue, but obviously this is quite a bobbly one, so you could, if you wanted to, you could use red liner tape or something like that just to hold it in place. But this will just take a few seconds to adhere to that paper. And I'm just going to turn it over go up to the line and snip it off. So I don't have to worry too much about the measurements I was doing because I can do that from the back. And then we can just pop that onto our card. Whoop. Oh, look, one of the hearts has fallen off. Don't worry. That's just because I didn't stick it down enough. There we go. Just pop that down. And I'm going to, again, use my wet glue. So I've got that little bit of wiggle room to get that onto my card. That's another little tip as well. Make sure, oh, actually, I've got my black border here. Let's just take that off a second. I knew it didn't measure up. I needed my little bit of black just to make that pop. Another thing about when you're making cards, a little recommendation for someone that has done this quite a few times, when you're putting your topper on, open up your card so you make sure that you don't put the topper on upside down or the card back to front. So that's just a little tip for you because I've done that before where I've put it the wrong side. There's always a way to get over it. You could always slice off the side and put it onto another topper. But I always find if I open it up, then it just makes it a little bit easier to know that I'm putting it right. And there we go. Once I've got my little topper in place, making sure I've got that wiggle room and that glue all solid down. There we go. All done. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more crafty tips and card inspiration.